Growing up in New Addington in the 1950s, I heard rare, fleeting references to an elderly relative who worked at Warlingham Park Hospital as a caretaker. But when he died, the fact that he was buried at the hospital struck me as odd. In fact, none of this story made much sense. I suspected a cover-up. I found out about the Bethlehem Hospital Archives and Museum and made inquiries. They had his records. He was a patient, not a caretaker. Fred was admitted in 1907. The diagnosis of the time was delusional insanity, somewhat different from the modern classification. On admission, he was in poor condition, thin and dirty, according to his medical records, totally convinced that he was weakened because blood was taken from him by unseen people using Edison's electric pumping machine and put into others. He also had an exaggerated sense of his own importance and capabilities. For a time, Fred said he was Edison. He was one of the blood pumpers, one of the government, while an overall delusion of persecution by electricity generally, and to power the machine draining his blood, prevailed. More symptoms were recorded: hearing voices, florid conversations with imaginary people, extreme withdrawal, then chronic mania, elation. Apparent intelligence fell, memory for time and place defective, speech becoming incoherent, periods of grimacing. A second main persecution had appeared. Noxious gases and airs were blown on him, general paranoia, and so on. In spite of this mental turmoil, Fred was no danger, and by 1914 was able to help the maintenance department under supervision. Over time, the various symptoms ebbed and flowed in severity. But by 1940 there were signs of remission. He said the company who put electric volts around him had not done the treatment for a while, and they had advised him, "It's time to think about retirement." He was 60 by then. By 1948, apart from being institutionalized, Fred's intelligence and memory were considered good. Although he had been going on annual holiday to the coast in the post-war years, he had no interest in the outside world, according to the notes, or even in himself in the early years of this phase. I discovered a photo taken on Fred's annual break from the hospital around 1954 by a seafront photographer at Margate. He is looking past the camera, eyes half closed as if focusing on the distance or deep in thought. He had been free of delusion for some years. I hope he didn't have a care in the world. From 1953 he just pottered about in the hospital gardens and died in 1957, 50 years to the week from his admission, and buried in the hospital cemetery in a pauper's grave. I find it tragic that this poor man was all but erased from our family history. There is anecdotal evidence of some visitors in the early years, but his later records say seldom has a visitor. It seems cruelly ironic that in the 1950s, from where we lived in New Addington, On quiet evenings, the clock at Warlingham Park Hospital could be heard chiming, less than a mile and a half away. There's a poignant entry made a year before Fred died. He said, "It's a mistake, me being here, but it's not too bad.